Let me tell you a story, my story, about what it's really like when an ordinary girl marries into a wealthy family. Not the fairy tale you might imagine. My name is Emily Lynn, and I come from a middle-class suburb in Chicago. My brother, David Lynn, is 10 years older than me and now one of the prominent names in tech venture capital on the West Coast. He lives in a gated estate in Napa Valley, drives a Porsche, and rubs shoulders with CEOs and celebrities. But this isn't about him. This is about Ava, his wife, my sister-in-law. Ava Thompson is 28, the same age as me. She never finished college and was working part-time as a fitness trainer when David met her during a corporate retreat at a high-end resort in Arizona. She's undeniably beautiful, think Hollywood actress on a day off kind of beautiful. Her features are effortlessly symmetrical, her posture impeccable, and she has a quiet, magnetic presence. But let me be clear, beauty alone didn't get her the ring. Before Ava, David dated models, lawyers, even a neuroscientist. None of them made it past the third month. What made Ava different? It wasn't just her looks. It was her patience, her silence, her ability to disappear in the background when needed. She knew how to endure, and in David's world, that meant everything. The event that brought things to light happened last Thanksgiving. We were hosting a family dinner at David's estate, and everything was picture perfect. The candles, the organic turkey, the linen napkins. But after dinner, I walked into the wine cellar to grab a bottle and overheard David speaking with a friend. He laughed and said, "Ava's a good wife, knows when to shut up and stay out of my way." I froze. That night, I noticed the little things I had previously ignored. Ava barely spoke at dinner. She served everyone, including my brother, with a smile, but her eyes were distant. She laughed when prompted and took their mockery like wallpaper, always present, never noticed. The truth is, my brother doesn't check in with Ava about where he goes, whom he sees, or when he'll be back. If he decides to fly to New York for a meeting at midnight, she doesn't ask. When he invites beautiful female friends over for wine tastings while Ava watches from the kitchen, she simply lowers her gaze. But that's just the surface. From the beginning of their relationship, Ava has been adjusting to a world she wasn't born into. David makes all the decisions, where they vacation, what furniture to buy, even what Ava should wear to public events. Once, during a golf outing with some investors, David joked that Ava came with the house. Everyone laughed. Ava smiled. I wanted to disappear from shame. People often assume women who marry rich men are gold diggers. But Ava didn't marry David for the money. She married him for stability. She grew up with a single mom, moved from town to town, and knew what it was like to sleep in a car. When David offered her something permanent, even if it came with conditions, she took it. But permanence isn't peace. At family gatherings, David often criticizes her in front of everyone. Last Christmas, when Ava spilled a glass of wine, he called her clumsy and useless in front of my parents and his colleagues. I handed her a napkin, trying to ease the tension, and saw her face turn red. She didn't cry. She never cries in public. Ava's strength isn't a fortress. It's a quiet corner where she stores her pain, out of view. She never fights back, never raises her voice. And that, I've come to realize, is the price of marrying into wealth, not the dress, not the ring, but the daily swallowing of your dignity in exchange for security. So if you ever dream of marrying a rich man and living in a mansion in wine country, remember this: you may not pay in cash, but you'll pay in silence. The morning after Thanksgiving, the estate was quiet. The guests had left, and the staff were cleaning up the remnants of a celebration that had felt more like a performance. I found Ava in the sunroom, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her toddler son, Lucas. She was humming softly while helping him build a wooden train track. There was something incredibly tender in the way she looked at him, as if he were the only place in her world where she could still breathe. I sat down near her. "He's getting so big." She nodded with a gentle smile, then glanced out the floor-to-ceiling windows toward the vineyard. "Sometimes I wonder what kind of man he'll become, if he grows up watching how his father treats me." Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight I'd never heard before. This wasn't the passive Ava I had known for the past 2 years. It was a woman on the edge of awakening. "I heard what David said last night," I admitted. "In the cellar." Ava didn't flinch. "He says things like that more often than you think." "It's just that last night, someone was finally listening." She stood, picked up a half-full sippy cup, and walked to the kitchen. I followed her, watching her move like a ghost who knows the shape of every wall. "I've been thinking about going back to school," she said casually, rinsing the cup. "Maybe online classes. Just to feel like I'm building something of my own." "Would David support that?" She paused. "He doesn't need to know right away." That was the first time I saw Ava deviate from the strict, invisible rules she'd lived under since marrying my brother. That winter, something began to shift. Slowly, quietly. Ava started waking up earlier, not just for Lucas, but to read. I noticed business books on the shelves and TED Talks in her YouTube history. She began dressing differently, not to impress, but to express. Instead of the designer dresses David preferred, she wore comfortable earth-toned sweaters, linen pants, and soft leather flats. She no longer asked him which earrings to wear before dinner parties. By spring, she had enrolled in a part-time marketing program online under a different name, her maiden name. She asked me to keep it secret, and I agreed. Meanwhile, David remained oblivious. He continued his globe-trotting lifestyle, boasting about new ventures, drinking expensive wine, and maintaining the image of a man in control. But he had no idea that the woman he controlled was beginning to build an exit. One evening in May, I received a message from Ava. "Can you watch Lucas next Thursday?" I replied, "Sure." "What's going on?" She sent a photo of a printed schedule, her first in-person seminar. "I'm going," she wrote. "Even if I have to lie about where I'm headed." When Thursday came, Ava left the house in jeans, a backpack over her shoulder, and a look of determination I had never seen on her face before. She didn't look back. I knew she wasn't going to walk out tomorrow, or the next day. She had no intention of creating a scandal. Ava wasn't that kind of woman. She was building her exit like she had lived her marriage, silently, strategically, and without permission. And I realized something. Ava didn't just marry into a rich family. She infiltrated it, and now, she was reclaiming herself, one quiet step at a time. It was a humid Thursday in June when Ava came back from her seminar, her cheeks flushed and her hair sticking slightly to her temples. She looked alive, almost radiant. Lucas was napping when she returned, and I watched her quietly as she poured herself a glass of water. "How was it?" I asked. She smiled. Not a forced smile. A real one. Intense. But I think I was the only one in the room who already knows how to handle a room full of arrogant men. I laughed. Your training ground was the Lin family. Ava's smile faded, but not from offense. Her expression turned thoughtful. You know what the professor said? Power doesn't shift when someone gives it to you. It shifts when you stop asking. It struck me how much that described Ava's transformation. She wasn't demanding power, she was simply taking it back, silently, one decision at a time. But the shift didn't go unnoticed for long. A week later, David returned from a 3-day startup summit in New York. He was in his usual form, designer luggage in one hand, a scowl on his face from a delayed flight. Ava greeted him with her usual calm demeanor, but when he noticed her laptop open on the kitchen table with notes scribbled in the margins of a marketing case study, his expression changed. "What's this?" he asked flatly. "School," Ava said, wiping Lucas's mouth gently after dinner. "I'm studying." David's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "You don't need a job." "I don't want a job," she replied. "I want an identity." He scoffed. "You already have one. You're my wife. You live in a $7 million home and never worry about bills. Why complicate things?" Ava didn't raise her voice. "Because I'm tired of being invisible." David stood there, dumbfounded, not angry yet, but confused in the way powerful men get when something they've taken for granted suddenly changes shape. Over the next few days, tension simmered. David didn't shout or explode, that would have been easier. Instead, he became colder. He began leaving earlier for work, skipping dinner, avoiding eye contact. Ava, to her credit, didn't flinch. She continued attending her virtual classes, taking Lucas to story time at the local library, and even scheduled a private driving lesson. One evening, I found her sitting alone in the backyard, under the glow of string lights that wrapped around the vineyard trellis. I sat beside her in silence until she spoke. "I used to think if I just stayed small enough, polite enough, quiet enough, I'd be loved." She turned to me, eyes glinting in the dark. "But David didn't marry me because he loved me. He married me because I wouldn't resist." I didn't know what to say. Ava wasn't a victim. She was a woman waking up inside a cage she once painted gold. The breaking point came in July. David hosted a summer wine tasting party, packed with VC partners, influencers, and minor celebrities. Ava, dressed in an understated navy silk dress, moved through the crowd like the perfect hostess, refilling glasses, introducing guests, smiling. But when David jokingly introduced her to someone as the best unpaid assistant money can't buy, something shifted in her expression. She walked away. Right then. Right in front of everyone. She disappeared upstairs. No tantrum, no scene, just a quiet refusal. The next day, Ava took Lucas and spent the weekend at a friend's cabin in Lake Tahoe. She left a note on the fridge. "I'm not running. I'm breathing." And for the first time since she entered our family, Ava wasn't the girl who belonged to a rich man. She was a woman who belonged to herself. Ava didn't tell anyone the exact address, not even me. All I knew was that she had borrowed a friend's family cabin near Lake Tahoe and left Napa behind with Lucas buckled safely in the back seat, a packed duffel bag in the trunk, and Silence riding in the passenger seat. The cabin sat on the edge of a quiet pine forest, tucked away from the main road with a narrow dirt path leading to it. No cell service, no luxury amenities. Just wood, air, and solitude. The first night, Lucas wouldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, crying for the familiarity of his crib, his stuffed lion, his father's deep voice echoing down the hall. Ava held him tightly, humming the same lullaby her mother used to sing. Eventually, he drifted off, and she stayed awake, watching the ceiling fan spin, wondering if she'd just ruined her life or saved it. The next morning, Ava woke before dawn. She wrapped herself in an old flannel coat, stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee, and watched the sun rise slowly over the lake, orange and gold bleeding into the water. It was the first time in years she could hear herself think. No staff. No David. No expectations. She made breakfast from scratch, pancakes with forest berries and maple syrup in a chipped ceramic bowl. Lucas smeared syrup across his cheeks, and Ava didn't wipe it immediately. For once, there was no one to impress. Later that day, she pulled out her laptop and spent 2 hours catching up on assignments for her online course. No interruptions. No mocking comments. She wrote an essay on branding strategy using her own life as an unspoken metaphor, how appearances create perceptions, but authenticity builds loyalty. Each afternoon, they walked down to the lake with a plastic bucket. Lucas threw stones, Ava collected thoughts. She journaled at night, not the suppressed words of her past diary, but the unfiltered voice of someone learning to speak again. By the third day, Lucas was sleeping soundly. Ava felt her shoulders loosen, her breathing deepen. She remembered who she used to be, before the estate, before the curated dinner parties, before she molded herself into someone unthreatening. She remembered Ava Thompson. Not Mrs. Lynn. Not the best unpaid assistant money can't buy. Just Ava. A girl who once dreamed of being a writer, who loved road trips and indie music and late-night thrift store hunting. One night, after putting Lucas to bed, she sat alone by the fire pit, scribbling furiously into her notebook. On the top of the page, she wrote, "What I want." And under that, "To have a name again. To finish my degree. To write a book about the truth no one tells. To raise Lucas in a home where women speak freely. To matter to myself first." She stared at the words until her eyes blurred. Back in Napa, David had called her 3 times. No voicemails. Just missed calls. She didn't answer. On the morning of the 4th day, Ava packed their bags and cleaned the cabin. Lucas was in good spirits, waving goodbye to the trees like they were old friends. As she buckled him into the car, her phone buzzed again. This time, she picked it up. David's voice was sharp, low, and trying to sound unaffected. "Are you done hiding?" Ava didn't flinch. "I'm not hiding, David. I'm recovering." There was silence. "I'll be home tomorrow," she said. "You're bringing Lucas back?" She looked at her son in the rearview mirror. "We're coming back. But not to play house." She hung up before he could respond. As she drove away from the cabin, sunlight flickered through the trees, casting stripes of light across the windshield. Ava wasn't running anymore. She was returning on her own terms. Ava returned to Napa Valley on a Monday afternoon. The air was warmer, almost heavy with ripening grapes and the low hum of vineyard life. She turned into the long gravel driveway of the estate, Lucas asleep in the back seat, a soft stuffed rabbit clutched in his arms. Everything looked exactly the same: the manicured lawn, the symmetrical hedges, the towering stone arch that marked the entrance. But Ava had changed. She carried Lucas inside, laid him gently in his crib, then walked down the marble hallway toward the kitchen. David was there, sipping coffee, his posture leaning against the countertop like nothing had happened. "You're back," he said without looking at her. "I am." He glanced up, reading her face like a stranger might scan a book cover. "Lucas okay?" "He's fine." David set down his cup. "You scared me, Ava." "That was unnecessary." Ava folded her arms. "Scaring you wasn't the point. Waking myself up was." A long pause hung between them. David tapped his fingers against the marble surface, his usual go-to move when buying time to reassert control. "I was thinking we could go away next weekend. Just the two of us. Cabo. Take a break." She shook her head slowly. "David, I didn't leave because I was tired. I left because I was disappearing." He blinked. "What does that even mean?" Ava stepped closer. "It means I'm not going back to being the quiet wife who never asks questions. I'm not here to decorate your social calendar or be your passive shadow. I'm here as myself. If that's too uncomfortable for you, say it now." For the first time in a long while, David was speechless. That night, Ava slept in the guest room. Not because she was angry, but because she needed space. Her body had returned to the estate, but her soul was still finding its way home. David didn't protest. He didn't come knocking at midnight or send a text demanding explanations. But the shift was undeniable. Over the next few days, Ava continued attending her online classes, openly now. She set up a small study corner in the sunroom, bought herself a new laptop, and printed out her course schedule on the fridge. David noticed. He didn't comment. He also noticed that she no longer waited for him to eat. She fed Lucas dinner at 6, and if David came home late, he reheated his own food. The staff started to follow Ava's rhythm rather than his. Then came the invitation. Ava received an email from a local women's entrepreneur group, one she'd quietly joined months before. They were hosting a panel discussion, and they wanted her to speak. The topic? Redefining identity, women who start over. When she told David about it, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "You speak on a panel?" "Yes," Ava said firmly. "Me." He opened his mouth, then paused. You know, if you want to rebrand yourself, you should probably use your maiden name. Thompson has a better ring for the press than Lynn. Ava smiled, cool, measured. Thank you for the advice. But I'll decide what name to use. David didn't push. Maybe he was starting to see it. That Ava had returned, not as a guest in his world, but as the woman she was always meant to become. And Ava? She no longer needed his permission. That weekend, she stood on stage in front of 200 women and shared her story, not with tears, not with bitterness, but with clarity and calm resolve. I didn't walk away from my marriage, she told the audience. I walked toward myself. The applause was real. And for the first time in years, so was her smile. The glow from the stage lights still lingered in Ava's mind days after the event. She'd spent so long being quiet that hearing applause, for her words, for her courage, felt surreal. But it wasn't the applause that changed her. It was the moment afterward, when a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes and said, I thought I was the only one. That night, Ava stayed up late with her laptop open and a dozen sticky notes spread across the table. It started with an idea. What if she created a space where women like her could talk without shame? A digital platform. A podcast. A brand. She named it her own name. It would be a resource for women navigating life after identity loss, whether from marriage, motherhood, status, or silence. It didn't matter if they were married to tech billionaires or working 2 jobs, if they felt invisible, they belonged. She shared the idea with me over coffee. Do you think anyone would actually listen? She asked, not with doubt, but with that cautious optimism that comes after years of walking on eggshells. I smiled. They're already listening. They just don't know where to go. By September, Ava had published her first podcast episode. It was raw, just her voice, her story. No sound effects, no flashy intro. Just Ava, telling the truth. I was once the woman everyone envied. Mansion, marble floors, housekeepers, luxury handbags, but I didn't own my time, my thoughts, or my name. The episode went viral within a week. She received hundreds of emails, women thanking her, others sharing similar experiences, some just writing to say, thank you for being brave so I could be brave too. David listened to the episode in his home office, behind closed doors. Ava never asked what he thought, and he didn't volunteer. But something in the house shifted. He started coming home earlier, sometimes cooking dinner or helping Lucas with his shoes. One evening, he sat beside Ava on the porch and said, "You're different now." She sipped her tea. "No. I've always been like this. You're just finally seeing me." He nodded. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a romantic turning point. It was an acknowledgement, the first honest one in their marriage. As her own name grew, Ava hired 2 part-time staff members, one to manage community outreach and the other for social media. She began interviewing other women on the podcast, a divorced woman rebuilding her business, a stay-at-home mom starting over at 40, a woman who left an arranged marriage and moved across the country with her toddler. Ava no longer cared about brand appearances. She wore what she wanted, spoke how she wanted, and when David invited her to a gala for one of his portfolio companies, she declined. "Why?" he asked. "I have a live stream with a guest that night. And I don't want to go." He looked surprised, but he didn't argue. That in itself was a win. One rainy Sunday, as Ava sat editing her latest episode, Lucas climbed onto her lap with a picture book and said, "Mommy, you're strong." She paused, the words hitting her deeper than she expected. "Who told you that?" she asked. He pointed to her podcast logo on the screen. "You said it." She laughed, holding him tighter. Later that night, Ava added a quote to the homepage of her website. "I didn't get stronger by staying silent. I got stronger by finally speaking in my own voice." Ava didn't leave the marriage that season. She stayed, but on her terms, no longer a ghost in a luxury cage, but a woman with boundaries, a purpose, and her own name. And sometimes, that's the bravest ending of all. By winter, her own name had gained national attention. Ava was invited to speak on a popular women's leadership panel hosted in San Francisco. The theme was reclaiming power after silence. Her photo appeared in digital magazines, and quotes from her podcast were reshared across social media by influencers and advocacy groups alike. For the first time in her adult life, Ava wasn't standing in someone else's shadow. And then, the backlash began. It started with a gossip blog. Tech VC's wife airs dirty laundry in disguise as empowerment. Is Ava Lynn exploiting her marriage for clicks? They posted clips from her podcast out of context, screenshot her photos, and labeled her an attention-seeking housewife. Someone even leaked details about her former fitness instructor job and mocked her lack of a college degree. David was the one who brought it up first. He came home, coat still on, phone in hand, jaw tight. "You've gone too public." Ava looked up from the table where she was editing her next episode. "That's the point. I'm getting questions at work. Investors are reading this crap. They're wondering why my wife is telling strangers we have a bad marriage." She exhaled. "Because it's my story too. And I've never named you." David's voice rose. "They know it's me, Ava. We have one kid, live in Napa. I'm not exactly hard to find." Ava stood, steady. "Maybe now they'll stop assuming I'm just the woman who sets the table and disappears." A long silence followed. David ran a hand through his hair and turned away, muttering, "You're not the same woman I married." Ava's response was soft, but firm. And thank God for that. That night, he slept in the guest room. This time, it was his choice. The next morning, Ava woke up to an email from a national media outlet. They wanted to profile her for a feature on modern female voices redefining success. But they warned, the piece would include mention of her marriage and the recent blog backlash. She stared at the email for a long time. She could walk away. Go back to quiet podcasting and soft influence. Or she could step fully into the storm and own it. By noon, she said yes. The interview was raw. Ava spoke with her usual clarity and emotional honesty. She admitted to feeling trapped for years, talked about the cost of silence, and the painful process of redefining herself, not as a victim, but as a survivor of emotional invisibility. The article exploded. Some praised her courage. Others tore her down. But Ava didn't hide. She posted a new podcast episode titled "The Price of Being Seen." In it, she said, "When you stop shrinking yourself to fit someone else's world, you'll scare people. Especially those who benefited from your silence." The episode reached 1 million downloads in a week. Then something unexpected happened. David came home early one afternoon. Lucas was napping, and Ava was in the garden, pruning the winter roses. He approached her slowly, not like a man about to argue, but like a man who had something to admit. "I read the article," he said. "The whole thing." Ava looked at him but said nothing. "I never realized," he started, pausing. "You weren't just unhappy. You were erased." Her hands didn't stop moving, but her breath caught. "I don't know if I can be the man you need," he continued. "But I think I want to try." Ava stood upright, wiping soil from her gloves. "Not for me. For yourself." He nodded, quiet. "And for Lucas." For the first time, Ava saw something unfamiliar in David's eyes: humility. Not a promise. Not redemption. But maybe, finally, understanding. And maybe that was enough, for now. It started with 3 emails. One was from a young woman in Miami, trapped in a controlling marriage with a man twice her age. The second was from a recent widow in Ohio, unsure of who she was without her husband of 25 years. The third was from a single mother in Kuala Lumpur, who had secretly built a dropshipping business from her kitchen but didn't believe she was worthy of calling herself successful. They didn't ask for money. They didn't ask for rescue. They asked Ava one thing. "How did you begin?" Ava stared at their words late into the night. It reminded her of the version of herself that used to cry in the bathroom between social events, the one who carefully reapplied lipstick to mask emotional bruises. That girl hadn't needed someone to save her. She needed someone to believe she wasn't weak for wanting more. So Ava replied. To all 3. With warmth, honesty, and a single question in return. "What do you want?" Over time, those 3 emails turned into 30. Then hundreds. And that's how her own name collective was born. What began as a solo podcast became a digital sisterhood, an online platform with mentoring sessions, storytelling workshops, anonymous forums, and a live series called The Unlearning Table, where women from all walks of life could gather to let go of labels that no longer served them. Ava hosted the first Zoom session from her sunroom. 22 women joined. 2 kept their cameras off. 1 wept through the entire hour. And all of them stayed. Each woman introduced herself with a sentence that didn't begin with "I'm someone's wife," "I'm just a mom," or "I used to be." Instead, they said things like, "I am learning to speak without apology. I am rewriting the rules I was taught. I am not angry, I'm just not numb anymore." Ava didn't lead with authority. She led with humility, sharing her story again and again, not as a success story, but as a reminder: you are allowed to begin, even if you're not ready, even if you're afraid, even if your voice shakes. Soon, Ava began hosting in-person workshops across cities: Chicago, Austin, Vancouver, and even Singapore. These weren't corporate seminars or overpriced retreats. They were living room gatherings with tea, notepads, open doors, and open hearts. At one of them, a woman named Rhea stood up and said, "I thought power meant being louder than the people who hurt me. But it turns out, it just means not needing their approval anymore." Ava smiled. She remembered the first time she didn't wait for David's permission to do something. That moment had been so small, so ordinary, and yet, it had cracked the silence wide open. Eventually, Ava launched a scholarship fund to support women transitioning out of emotionally oppressive environments. Not just physical escape, but the rebuilding that comes afterward, the therapy, the education, the laptop to start a business, the babysitter to attend an interview. She called the fund room to return, because she knew. Sometimes, you don't leave to escape a place. You leave to return to yourself. And as her own name grew into a quiet global movement, Ava stayed grounded in her purpose. She was not trying to be famous. She was trying to be useful. David, now visibly more involved as a father, occasionally attended events, not as the husband, but as a man learning to listen. Ava never claimed they were perfect. She didn't need to. What mattered was that she was no longer invisible. And as Ava stood in front of hundreds of women at her first international conference, she ended her speech with a single truth. You don't need a new name, a new city, or a new man to start over. You just need one thing, the courage to believe you belong to yourself. The room fell silent. Then it rose to its feet. By the time her own name turned two, Ava was everywhere. Her face graced the cover of a national women's leadership magazine. She'd been interviewed by NPR, featured on TED's social platform, and asked to co-author a book about personal reinvention. She spoke with poise and warmth, and women across continents quoted her in classrooms, coffee shops, and courtrooms. And then, without warning, everything threatened to unravel. It began with an anonymous email sent to her sponsors and event partners, alleging that Ava had fabricated parts of her story for sympathy and profit. The message included selectively edited podcast clips, out-of-context screenshots from old group chats, and a fabricated claim that she was using donor money for personal luxury expenses. Ava found out about it during a flight layover in Dallas. Her team was waiting for her at the gate, faces pale. For sponsors pulled out, her assistant whispered, "They're asking for statements. Some of the community is panicking." Ava sat down hard, her phone buzzing with texts, her email flooding with questions and apologies. Some loyal followers defended her immediately. Others hesitated. A few, women she had once mentored personally, went quiet. And the worst part? David hadn't even heard it from her. When she walked in the door that night, he was already on the phone with someone from a VC firm. "They're asking if your platform's a liability," he said after hanging up. "If our name gets dragged further into this." She cut him off. "Our name?" He stared at her. "Ava, I supported you. I've kept quiet. But now this could affect both of us." The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. "This isn't about you, David," she said calmly. It never was. That night, she stared at her ceiling for hours, trying to figure out what hurt more, the attack itself, or how quickly people questioned her truth. The next morning, Ava did what she had always done when things fell apart. She told the truth. She scheduled a live stream. No PR filters. No prep. No script. Thousands tuned in. She sat at her desk, looking into the camera with tired but steady eyes. I built her own name because I once lived a life where I didn't have one. I told my story honestly. Imperfectly, yes, but never with the intent to manipulate. If you need to walk away, I respect that. But I won't defend my worth to people who were never listening in the first place. Then she added one line that sealed her fate. You cannot build your voice on the approval of people who benefit from your silence. The stream went viral. Within 48 hours, 2 of the sponsors who had pulled out quietly asked to come back. A prominent journalist dug into the anonymous claims and exposed them as coordinated smears traced to a rival entrepreneur who had once tried to buy Ava's brand. The fallout didn't vanish overnight. There were scars. Followers lost. Trust tested. Media headlines ranged from redemption in real time to Ava Lynn, bravery or branding. But Ava didn't flinch. She scaled back for a month. No new episodes. No speaking tours. She focused on the women who reached out privately. She began running small local circles again, barefoot, unrecorded, handwritten signs on the door. Back to her roots. And that's when she realized she didn't build a brand. She built a movement. One that didn't need media coverage to survive. One that didn't crumble when questioned. One that had already planted itself in thousands of hearts. Months later, when she returned to the mic, her voice had changed, not weaker, but deeper. What we build with our truth will be tested. That's how we know it's real. Ava didn't just survive the storm. She walked through it, head high, name intact, and voice stronger than ever. Autumn arrived in Napa quietly, like a secret. The leaves along the vineyard lanes turned golden and red, and the estate felt calmer now, less like a museum, more like a lived-in home. Ava had rebuilt everything. Her own name was thriving again, smaller, more intentional, and deeply rooted. She no longer chased virality. She curated impact. Her podcast returned, but now with long-form interviews, deeper conversations, and no sponsors, just supporters. She had rebuilt herself too. Lucas was starting preschool. Ava had started writing her first book. And David, well, David had changed in small but sincere ways. He no longer expected dinner at 7 or silence when embarrassed. He asked questions now. Sometimes he even listened. But Ava knew better than to confuse improvement with resolution. One morning, she received a letter. Handwritten. From a literary agent who had been following her work for months. The offer, a book deal, major publisher, global release, full creative control. The only condition? She'd have to move to New York for a year. They wanted her close to the PR team, to the editor, to the pulse of the industry. She held the letter in her lap, sunlight warming the page. That afternoon, she picked up Lucas early from school and took him to the park. They sat under an oak tree, sharing orange slices. Would you be okay living in a different house for a little while? She asked gently. He nodded. Is it near Grandpa's? She laughed. No, it's far. Farther than Grandpa. But there's snow in winter. He grinned. Like the snow on TV? She kissed his forehead. Yes. Just like that. That evening, she told David. He listened quietly as she explained the offer, the opportunity, the timeline. And what about us? He asked finally. Ava hesitated. That's the part one don't have an answer to. David leaned back, eyes unreadable. You'd leave? I'd go, she corrected, because I need to. He looked at her, not angry, not pleading, just unsure. You've built something beautiful here, he said. I did, she nodded. But maybe it was just the beginning. Later that night, she stood in front of the mirror in the guest room, the one she never moved out of. She stared at her reflection, not to fix anything, but to remember. Who she used to be. Who she had become. Who she still wanted to be. She thought about all the doors she'd walked through, some slammed behind her, others creaked open by her own hand. This one wasn't a door. It was a window onto the world she once thought was closed to her. The next morning, Ava sent 2 emails. One to the literary agent. One to her son's new preschool in Brooklyn. She didn't leave David with a dramatic speech or a slammed suitcase. She left with grace, intention, and the soft click of a front door that finally didn't lock behind her. She promised Lucas they'd visit Napa often. She promised herself she wouldn't shrink again, not for comfort, not for familiarity, not for love. As their taxi pulled away from the estate, Lucas pressed his face to the window. Are we going to be happy there? Ava smiled, holding his small hand in hers. We're already on our way. The city hummed outside Ava's apartment window. Not in the chaotic, overwhelming way it used to feel during her first weeks in Manhattan, but in a rhythmic, almost comforting kind of way. The distant sirens, the chatter from the sidewalk cafe below, the occasional honk. It was the sound of movement, of possibility. Her brownstone walk-up in Brooklyn wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, uneven floors, a radiator that hissed like an angry cat in the winter. But it was hers. Every plant, every second-hand bookshelf, every scribbled sticky note on the fridge. Lucas was in preschool. He loved it. He came home with finger-painted masterpieces, stories about Miss Carla, and requests for peanut butter sandwiches in the shape of stars. Ava had just made a pot of tea. She sat by the window with her manuscript, now in its final round of edits. Her publisher had chosen the title she fought for. Her own name, What We Leave Behind to Find Ourselves. The cover was simple. No photo. Just her words. She hadn't posted a podcast in over a month. Not because she'd stopped, she simply didn't feel the need to speak all the time. She was learning to live in the quiet between the sentences. Today, there was no speaking event, no launch meeting, no interviews. Just a rainy Tuesday, chamomile tea, and a view of the street where dog walkers passed and baristas knew her name. Her phone buzzed. A message from David. Lucas looks happy in the new pictures. You're doing great. She stared at the screen for a moment, then replied simply. Thank you. They didn't talk often. But when they did, it was civil. Respectful. Real. There was no final fight. No divorce announcement. Just a quiet understanding that some love doesn't survive awakening, but it can evolve into something softer. Something still valuable. Ava took a deep breath and looked out the window. Across the street, a woman stood on the sidewalk, holding a stack of books to her chest, her face turned toward the sky as the rain began to fall gently. Ava smiled, imagining the woman's story, what she carried, what she hoped for. She opened her journal and wrote. Peace didn't arrive like a wave. It came like a breath. Like walking down a street with no one to impress and nothing to prove. She closed the journal. Sipped her tea. The window was open just a crack. Enough to let the breeze in. Enough to remind her that the world was still wide, and she was still walking toward it. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's escape. But as Ava. Just Ava. And that, finally, was enough.